there, Booktube. Welcome back to my channel. Today I just wanted to talk about my experience judging with Booktube Prize Finals in 2020. I was a judge in earlier rounds for both fiction and nonfiction, but for the finals I was a judge for the nonfiction category, and I'm really excited about that because I thought it was such a strong category of 6 finalists. One of the books was one that I'd already read, and that was Solitaire by Albert Woodfox, and I'm happy that it came back as a finalist, even though ultimately I didn't choose it as my winner. But more on that later. So I had 6 books to read for the finals, one that I'd previously read. So I had 5 books, and Robert from Barter Horse, he's the organizer of the Booktube Prize. I'll link him down below if you don't already follow Robert. Go check him out. And he gives us 2 months to read these each round. But me, I'm a procrastinator at heart. So I ended up reading the 5 books that I had to read in 1 month. And they're pretty heavy topics. So although I initially thought that I would reread Solitary, I didn't have time and didn't really want to reread it anyway. So 6 books. I'd already read once. I'll talk about that one first. And Solitary by Albert Woodfox. This is his memoir. This is a book about his experience being an inmate in prison. For a long time he was in solitary confinement. For a long time, I mean like several decades. And so in his memoir, he talks about how he became an inmate in the first place in his youth, how he cycled in and out of jail because of petty crimes, but eventually the level of criminal acts escalated along with his prison terms, and eventually they kind of threw the book at him and used him as a scapegoat to mark unsolved crime, but also targeted him as revenge for his affiliation with the Black Panther movement and for his political affiliations in lots of ways. And so even though the book felt like it went on and on, it's really because Woodfox's experience went on and went way past what you know should happen, way past penance for his acts, and just became him being targeted and, you know, people not wanting to acknowledge that they need to make a change. So I felt that this was a really strong book, but it ultimately wasn't my favorite of the 6. So at the end of this video, I'll tell you my rankings. But for now, the first book that I read in September to judge a Booktube Prize was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And Chanel Miller is a young woman who was previously known to the public as Jane Doe or Emily Doe. And that's because she was a victim of a sexual crime. As a young woman, she attended a frat party at Stanford University, and she was drunk, she passed out, and she was raped by another college student. And the book is about her experience finding out about what happened to her, because like I said, she was drunk and she passed out. And so while the book is about Chanel Miller's experience, about her finding out what happened to her and getting justice for it, it's also about championing the rights of other women, the rights of other victims to get justice as well. It's about the burden of proof that sometimes we place on victims, bashing them for the choices that they have made and blaming them for the things that they've endured, but inviting us to move into a different space, into a space of empathy for victims, but also of understanding that there's nothing that a woman has done to invite violence upon herself. And the book is just so moving, but also so powerful. I felt like it was a really strong record of someone who could have been a victim, who could have disappeared into victimhood, but used her experience to champion the rights of women, to move forward into a space of power and empowerment, but also trying to unify voices of women who've been oppressed and silenced by the patriarchy, now coming forward in unity and moving forward in power and just speaking up and demanding change. I thought that this book was so powerful. So that was the first book that I read in September for the Booktube Prize, and I thought it was such a high standard and one that I wanted to see if other books would measure up to it. Then I read In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, and this opened up a brand new subject matter to me because I never thought about this before. Carmen Maria Machado is a queer young woman, and she talks about her experience with domestic violence in a same-gender partnership. So she met a woman who she thought, I feel like she thought that this woman was better than she deserved. And so she allowed herself to disappear into this inferiority and allowed this other woman to abuse her just because, you know, she felt that this woman was way out of her league. What I really liked about the book was how it was presented. It's outlined as vignettes, and each vignette has a different theme as its subject. So dream house as this theme and dream house as this theme, and I thought it was really well arranged. The vignettes alternate between first person and second person, and I thought that that arrangement was also pretty clever and really interesting, but ultimately I didn't connect well enough with the story, maybe because it flipped back and forth between all those narratives, and I didn't feel like it went past the subject of this author and her experience. Like, I didn't feel like it was representative enough of the community. Maybe that's just me, maybe that's my fault, but I didn't love this book as much as I loved Chanel Miller's experience, because, you know, both of these were talking about experiences with violence, experiences of people taking advantage of them, but I just felt like In the Dream House wasn't quite as strong in its connection with the wider community. So ultimately I didn't love that as much. The next book that I read was Say Nothing by Patrick Haddon Keefe, and this is about the troubles in Ireland. And so we're reading about the conflict, almost like a civil war in Ireland, where there's conflict between Protestants and Catholics, and there are conflicts between people who want Ireland to be entirely a republic and people who don't mind the connection with the crown, with England, and the cycle of violence that perpetuated these communities as individuals got so wrapped up in the politics for so long. What I really liked about this book was the opportunity to learn about history that isn't recorded anywhere else that I've read. I've read quite a few books now about these troubles, about the issues in Ireland, but I've never seen them consolidated in this one place before, where we're reading about the personal stories. So I thought that that was a strength, but it was also a weakness in that the author moved back and forth between stories and following individuals. We follow one individual for a long time and we're getting really into their story, and then he moves to another individual and we follow that story, and we don't always know the connection between those two people for a really long time. So while I thought it was a strength where we're seeing the personalization of the war, it almost felt like little rabbit holes that we were going down and not quite exploring them before we came out and got submerged into another one. So I like that one, but I didn't love it, so it's not very high on my list. The fifth book that I read was No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder, and Snyder is a journalist writing about domestic violence, but specifically domestic violence cases that result in women getting killed by their partners. Well, one of the major strengths about this book was how it was arranged, in that there are three parts. The first part focuses on victims, the second part focuses on their abusers, and the third part focuses on people who are working to make changes in how domestic violence cases are treated in the law. I thought that one of the major strengths about this book was in its arrangement, but also in the stories that were told and how they were reported. The book went pretty deep on a couple of stories, and so we learned specific cases and saw the escalation of violence and learned some of the telltale signs, how to recognize domestic violence, and specifically how to recognize where cases are even more serious than others. And I thought that that was really powerful. I thought that it was pretty groundbreaking to go into the minds of aggressors and try to understand. Like, there was this question that was posed where she talked about how sometimes we ask, why do victims stay? But then she started to ask, why do the aggressors, why do these abusers stay? What is it that makes them think that they can't just leave these relationships? And she talks about the lack of control that aggressors feel, not just that they feel powerful, but sometimes they feel so powerless to escape from a situation, and aggression and abuse is the only way that they feel like they can deal with how they're feeling. thought that was powerful, even though I don't completely endorse the statement, but I thought it was a powerful statement nonetheless. And so I really appreciated this book, even though, again, it didn't quite match up to my standard. And the last book that I read was Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. And Farrow is a journalist who was working with NBC, and he was tasked with investigating rumors that had been swirling around Harvey Weinstein for some time. And so Farrow started to investigate what he thought was an isolated case of sexual abuse, but it became a bigger investigation when he realized that although he had a story, his host media would not release it. And so what began as an investigation of sexual abuse and sexual predators became an investigation in the structure and the framework that had allowed sexual predators to proliferate, and that was pretty much causing them to continue. And if they're allowed to abuse and silence their victims, then it just means that they feel like they can get away with even more. And so this was a tremendously sensational story of investigative journalism and the power of journalists to still impact our society. Because Ronan Farrow, although his host media refused to sign off on his story, he was able to take his story someplace else and get published, but not just to bring awareness to what was happening. Eventually, Harvey Weinstein was charged. He was sentenced to prison, and other cases that were investigated also saw those abusers lose their positions of power. So I thought that this was a really powerful story, and got very high ratings for me, but ultimately couldn't catch Chanel Miller's Know My Name. So we're going to cut now to me showing you how I submitted my ballots, and you will see that, of course, my first pick was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. In second place, I gave it to Solitaire by Albert Woodfox because I'm still reeling from some of the information that Woodfox shared, and I thought that this is a must read for everyone. Followed very closely by Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow, and the other two you can see right here. So that was my experience reading and ranking the finals for the Booktube Prize in 2020. By now you would have known that the Booktube Prize has been awarded, and Know My Name by Chanel Miller is the #1 book. It was awarded the #1 spot, and so I am extremely pleased that this book has gotten even more attention, because people now may be inclined to pick up this book even if they hadn't thought about reading it before. So that was my experience ranking the books, and baby is ready for mommy to start making videos. So thank you so much for watching this video. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more. Let's talk in the comments, and love to know if you read along with the Booktube Prize this year, if you were a judge, or if you were just reading these books, or maybe you read a few of them. If you thought anything different from me about these books, I'd love to chat with you down below. So until next time, happy reading. Bye.